It was a very terrible experience for me. Like, the last 10 days in Ukraine was very, very difficult for me. Like, it wasn't what I was expecting. The military there was very mean. They were just so mean to us, like as if we were no humans. No food, nothing, no support. It was just on your own. All they did was go to your embassy. If your embassy is not there, the rest they leave it up to you. We worked for like 12 hours with no food and nothing. You just have to. That was one of my worst experiences. Like, the soldiers that was on duty that day was mean. They were just so heartless. Like, they treated us like animals totally. So they started chasing us away, hitting us with wood. And even, you can see they even hit my leg right here.
In Vladimir Putin's rambling war declaration on Thursday morning, he threw everything at the wall in hopes something might stick. He didn't just cite the Iraq war, the Balkans, the US intervention in Syria. He didn't just perform his usual rewriting of history, claiming Ukrainian land is Russian land. He also said this, and I quote, "We will seek to demilitarize and denazify Ukraine." Later, he addressed Ukrainian soldiers directly, saying, quote, "Your fathers, grandfathers, and great-grandfathers did not fight the Nazi occupiers and did not defend our common motherland to allow today's neo-Nazis to seize power in Ukraine." All of which seems awfully weird since Ukraine is not a Nazi country.
We go through most dangerous course of action, and if Russia became to attack a massive offensive operation to Kyiv, Mariupol, Odessa and someone else, our people should be ready.
Country. So what in the world is Vladimir Putin going on about? Well, it's part of a Russian propaganda narrative, one that's long found currency among the American far right and parts of the far left. A lie told in bad faith, but one that almost a decade ago held a sliver of truth. It started in 2014 when Ukrainian demonstrators forced the Russian-aligned president, Viktor Yanukovych, to flee the country.
But as for the immediate crisis, let's ask ourselves this. Who precipitated this crisis? The American media says it was Putin and the very bad, though democratically elected, president of Ukraine, Yanukovych. But it was the European Union, backed by Washington, that said in November to the democratically elected president of a profoundly divided country, Ukraine, you must choose between Europe and Russia. That was an ultimatum to Yanukovych. Remember, wasn't reported here, at that moment, what did the much despised Putin say? He said, why? Why does Ukraine have to choose? We are prepared to help Ukraine avoid economic collapse, along with you, the West. Let's make it a tripartite package to Ukraine, and it was rejected in Washington and in Brussels. That precipitated the protests in the streets.
Putin responded by invading and backing Russian separatists across Ukraine. And in the fighting, far-right fringe militias joined other Ukrainian elements to defend their homeland. Chief among them was the Azov Battalion, a paramilitary formed by, yes, neo-Nazis.
Are you a Nazi?
No, I don't think I'm a Nazi. I'm a Ukrainian nationalist.
What does that mean?
The main confrontation is about that some ethnic groups have control many business structures, some economic, some political forces, and
which ethnic groups?
Russians and Jews and the Poles. It may be some non-Ukrainian group control a huge percent of some economic or political power. And of course, in this situation, Ukrainian people have some tension between it, and it causes conflict.
Now, the African Union's responded to mounting accounts of Africans being mistreated as they try to flee Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Leaders from the continent have said that they are disturbed at reports that African citizens have been refused crossing to safety over the Polish border. The African Union said that singling out Africans trying to escape war would be shockingly racist and called on all countries to show the same amount of empathy to all victims of the conflict. Now, the reports add a disturbing dimension to the conflict that has sent 500,000 people flooding out of the country. Amongst them, Africans that hail from everywhere from Kenya, Ghana, Nigeria to Morocco and Ivory Coast. More than 20% of Ukraine's international students are Africans. Some say that many non-white people have been prevented from boarding buses and trains, refused entry into Poland, been forced to give up their seats, and been threatened with violence while stuck at borders.
We probably don't want to be rubbing shoulders with organized far-right militant groups that have, that are very open about it. I mean, you could go right now and view on YouTube their videos of their trainings, the very forward symbolism. They're not hiding this stuff.
Canadian diplomats and soldiers in Ukraine took an unusual meeting in June of 2018, one that's now coming to light. It was a meeting with one of the paramilitary units raised to fight off the Russian invasion of Ukraine's eastern provinces. One problem, that unit, the Azov Battalion, has been linked to Neo-Nazism, and the Canadian military knew.
But other far-right groups came and went too, with names like Right Sector, Patriot of Ukraine, and White Hammer. Few made much of an impact on the fighting or on Ukrainian society. But even back then, Putin was falsely claiming that the neo-Nazi groups ran Ukraine. Never mind.
Western media outlets have finally begun reporting on the neo-Nazi threat that is growing inside Ukraine, which is a close Western ally against Russia. Well, one of the most scandalous reports now shows that another key U.S. ally, Israel, is in fact arming some of these neo-Nazi groups in Ukraine, who have carried out attacks on ethnic and religious minority groups, including the Roma, and also Jews inside Ukraine.
Never mind the fact that in Ukraine's most recent election in 2019, the country's ultra-nationalist far-right coalition gained just over 2% of the vote and 0 seats in parliament. These guys don't run anything in Ukraine, with one notable exception. The Azov Battalion still enjoys status as a National Guard unit, one that US and Canadian militaries refuse to work with when they're training Ukrainian troops. In fact, you may have seen them recently in viral photos showing Azov soldiers training regular Ukrainians, including a grandmother, for possible insurgency fighting against Russian invaders.
As I said, the Azov Battalion, which began as a neo-Nazi militia, is now incorporated into the Ukrainian National Guard and is fighting pro-Russian separatists. And in Asa Winstanley's report, he also quotes a letter from the Israeli Defense Ministry that it wrote in response to a lawyer who had requested an end to Israeli military aid to Ukraine, citing the reports of Nazis attacking Ukrainian Jews and also Roma in Ukraine. Max, previously here at The Real News, reported on how the United States has directly armed Nazis in Ukraine by arming the Azov Battalion. And in fact, the Azov Battalion has posted photos on its website showing it meeting with American military officials. So today we're going to talk about how Israel, which claims to defend international Jewry, is in fact arming Nazis in Ukraine.
The vast majority of Ukrainians have little in common with Azov's extremists, but with the constant threat of Russian invasion, they don't mind the help. That's according to Michael Colborn, a Bellingcat researcher who literally wrote the book on Azov. This week he told the Israeli paper Haaretz that if you ask Ukrainians what do they think of Azov's politics, or mention that they are far-right extremists, many people will say, I don't really care about that. I don't share those views. I'm more interested in what they can do to defend Ukraine.
And Dr. Olison, we're hearing it. There is a hierarchy when they're trying to escape Ukraine because of the Russian invasion. They're letting Ukrainians out first, then Indians, and then blacks, if they're allowing the blacks out. But Indian students are complaining as well, saying that guards shot at them, not hit anyone, but shot at them.